assure you that what you will observe is a vast wasteland.
Free and uncorrupted communication.
We are happy to be able to meet with you today, thanks to UC Television, also thanks to the Environmental Studies program, the Department of Black Studies, of Geography, of Sociology, the Bren School of Environmental Science and Management, and most of all, the Critical Issues in America series, who provided the funding that made this all possible. I'd also like to invite those of you who are interested in Katrina in particular and the equity issues surrounding Katrina to a similar session, same time, same place, 3 o'clock this coming Monday afternoon, May 1st. Somehow seems appropriate with Katrina, people shouting Mayday, Mayday. But today we have probably America's two leading scholars in environmental justice issues. And I want to start, I'm Bill Freudenberg, by the way, from the Environmental Studies program here at UCSB. And I want to say just about 3 minutes of introduction before I introduce first Bob Bullard and then the second Paul Mohai. Which is to say that way back around Earth Day, there were a few people who seemed to notice that environmental protection was a more serious problem for people whose pocketbooks were thin and whose skin was dark than for rich white people who wore ties. But we pretty much forgot about that. The nation pretty much forgot about that until about 1982 when a then young fellow named Bob Bullard started writing about it. And especially 1987 when Ben Chavis and some others published Toxic Wastes and Race, which got a whole lot of people, both in the academic community and the policy community, paying attention to the question of whether we were providing unequal environmental protection. After a very short time, it got to be a big debate, and especially probably the best known scholar working on what I guess I would call now, from in retrospect, the other side of the debate, Dr. Anderton of the University of Massachusetts, published a very well-known article in a very prestigious journal, Demography, arguing that really if you did the numbers right, it showed that maybe income made a difference, but that race didn't. Now, the original plan for our whole Critical Issues in America series was to invite people from all sides of an issue to discuss the topic, and we actually invited Dr. Anderton to come join us, and he said, well, actually, the person who's doing the best work now is Paul Mohai, who just happened to be the second person that we invited for today. So rather than giving you competing points of view today, I think we're going to be giving you, not by intent, but by fortuitous circumstances, one of those cases where science really does move toward consensus. I think that if even Dr. Anderton says now that Paul Mohai's numbers are better than his numbers, that means that pretty much the debate is over. And you will be one of the first audiences to hear the definitive, or as close to definitive statement as we can get at the present point in time, statements on what is the relationship between environmental justice, race, and class in the United States. Our first of two speakers is Bob Bullard, Dr. Robert Bullard, Clark Atlanta University, the author of many books, including Toxic Waste. I'm blanking out on it, Bob. Dumping in Dixie, which has been assigned for so many of my classes that with Alzheimer's kicking in, I couldn't even think of the title of it. Rather than blow your introduction any further, Bob, why don't I ask you to come up here and do your own presentation? I give you Bob Bullard.
Thank you. Thanks, Bill. Good afternoon. I'm Robert Bullard. I direct the Environmental Justice Resource Center at Clark Atlanta University in Atlanta, Georgia. And before joining the faculty and starting the center, I was a sociology professor at UC Riverside. down the road. I'm a sociologist by training, and I'm an environmental sociologist, and I'm proud to say that I am an environmentalist. If you look at the work that has gone on over the last 25 years, you'll see that that environmental justice was not always a term that was understood or even given any respect. So my presentation is the quest for environmental justice, human rights, and the politics of pollution. As a matter of fact, the title is, the presentation is actually taken from the title of my most recent book. Not a plug, not a commercial. But when you look at the various books that I've written, some of them deal with housing, some deal with transportation, community economic development, health, access to jobs and employment, the issue of sustainability, sprawl, smart growth, regional equity. These are all different books, but it's the same book. But don't tell anybody. When you talk about this whole question of environment and how we define environment, for a long time the environment was considered this place out there. And what the environmental justice movement attempted to do is to bring in the various components. The environment is everything, where we live, work, play, go to school, worship, as well as the physical and natural world. So that covers a whole lot. Doesn't leave a whole lot, it doesn't leave a whole lot out. And so when we talk about this whole question of environmental justice and the principle of environmental justice, it embraces the principle that all people and communities are entitled to equal protection of environmental laws, housing laws, transportation laws, civil rights laws, etc. And so when you start converging environment, human rights, civil rights, the right to have a clean workplace, the right to have food that's safe and healthy, and access to health care, insurance, etc., you start getting out of the more traditional realm of environment that we generally may think of to dealing with social issues and equity issues. And so what environmental justice does, it brings it all together under one tent. If you look at this whole question of the various components and the various organizations that are out there doing environment work, and whether it's in government or whether it's in non-governmental organizations, community-based organizations, environmental groups, conservation groups, faith-based organizations, etc., I think it's important that you understand that the various areas that environmental justice really, the areas that it touches, really had a lot to do with its foundation, its roots. And environmental justice came out of a social justice, social equity, human rights component. One of the first books that Sierra Club books did that dealt with people was a book that I kind of like forced. Well, I didn't force. I forced the Sierra Club to publish. This is back in 1992. Michael Fisher and I were on the board of directors of Friends of the Earth, and at one of our board meetings, I approached him and said, Michael, Sierra Club, they really do great coffee table books. And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, it's time for Sierra Club. They've been around since the 1880s. It's time for them to do a real book about struggle, about justice, about equity. And he wanted to know, what do you mean? And I said, I explained to him. He said, do you have anything? I gave him a two-pager, and he said, when can you get this to me? I FedExed it to him. That it was like Friday. They had it on Monday. That's how that book came out. And you have to do what you have to do. And Sierra Club members read their books religiously. And Sierra, you know what I'm saying. And so if a book that comes out from Sierra Club, it must be a Sierra Club book. My most recent book, The Quest for Environmental Justice, Human Rights, and the Politics of Pollution, is a follow-up to the Unequal Protection book. The book was so, well received that they say, okay, let's do it again, 10 years later. And I said, okay, and we did it. The whole question of how do we bring sustainability issues, the issue of precaution, the precautionary principle, the issue of fairness. How do you bring the science into a lot of those arenas? And oftentimes when we talk from the standpoint of locally unwanted land uses, or LULUs, or the siting of polluting facilities, whether it be a landfill, incinerator, or petrochemical plant, or whatever, in most cases it has very little to do with the hydrology or the toxicology or the epidemiology in terms of siting. The only science in many cases that's involved is political science and sociology. Who gets what, when, where, and why, and the power imbalances that push the power imbalances that really push those things that other people don't want into what we call the path of least resistance. And the path of least resistance historically have been poor people, working class people, and people of color, and people without political power. When you get those combinations acting, you get a quadruple whammy, and you get those what we call vulnerable communities or sacrifice zones. And so when we talk about addressing equity or addressing inequities, we're talking about not just looking at the things that are bad, the negatives, the externalities, but also the distribution of the things that are good. I've found in many cases in a lot of communities that I've studied from coast to coast, and lots of places in between, that poor communities have a disproportionate share of the negatives, the bad stuff, and have a shortage of the good things, shortage of libraries, shortage of grocery stores, full-service grocery stores, shortage of sidewalks, parks, green space, those things that most middle-income communities take for granted. And we know there is a relationship between health and the physical environment. And so when we talk about all those things, how we bring the issue of equity into it, the environmental justice movement that may have started initially as an anti-toxics, anti-waste facility siting movement has expanded to encompass where we live, work, play, worship, go to school, as well as the physical and natural world. And so when we talk about the issues that I'm dealing with now, and I'll give you the short version, and you don't have to wait for the book. The book is out, but you may have to wait for the movie. But key questions are, do government officials respond differently to emergencies in people of color communities and white communities? And the emergencies that we're talking about include industrial accidents, environmental contamination such as Superfund, natural disasters such as earthquakes and hurricanes and tornadoes, bioterrorism threats, epidemics, health epidemics like bird flu and SARS and all those other things. Do people of color and whites have different perceptions of fairness in regard to emergency response to health and environmental emergencies? In other words, the world in black and white. And in most cases, the world is not in black and white. There are shades in between. Because of the complexity of our society, most things in this world are not just clear. There are various nuances. And so if you are in a world where there are various shades of red, yellow, black, brown, white, and the world that's imposed and superimposed on you oftentimes will be jaded or will be colored by your own experiences and your own cultural and subcultural groups and the way that you have been socialized. Third issue, what strategies are needed to address pre-existing social and environmental vulnerabilities that are often worsened by disasters and health emergencies? That include natural as well as man-made. And so just flip back to 1978 when I got involved, and I was pressed into duty. 2 years out of graduate school, I was asked to collect data on a lawsuit, Bean versus Southwestern Waste Management, which was filed by my wife. And she sued. I was working for a state university in Texas Southern University, a predominantly black university, historically black university. Just like me saying when my family is predominantly black. This is all black university. And so she asked me to collect data for this lawsuit. She had just sued the state of Texas, and my employer. I'm a junior sociology professor. No tenure, and so she sued my employer. So I said, okay, I'll do it. And so she